Hello, my name's Rob and welcome to Swift Slots, and welcome back to part 2 of turning a 1/43 scale die-cast toy car into a slot car. So in this episode I'm going to be making a set of tyres. I'm going to be getting this chassis to go into this body shell and see if I've created a usable slot car at the end of it. And if you fancy doing the same as me, I'm offering these two products for sale in my website, description below. So just be warned, if you do buy this chassis, it's not a finished chassis in as much as you can just buy it and whack it in your car in half an hour. There's a little bit of work behind it depending on the body shell that you put it in, but it's a really good start and it's a lot of fun. So grab yourself a cup of tea and enjoy the video. Thank you very much. Nice and flat, and they'll be good to go on that car. So as you can see in the video, I'm actually at the stage now where I've got my back axle in. However, this I think is a better idea before you get to this axle stage. When you've got access to just the plain axle on one side, you want to be thinking about getting your front wheels in. And the way that I decided to do that was to take your car and make sure that your wheels are exactly where you want them to be. In this case, the Audi is perfect. Some models are not always completely perfect. Most are, but sometimes they're not. But this is, it's spot on. So my idea is take the wheel off, or have it fall off as just happened. Take yourself a piece of plastic. This is 2 mil thick. drill a hole which is exactly the same size as the nub on this stub, or whatever axle you've got running through. In this case it's 2.3 mil, which is handy because that's pretty much the same size as a slot car axle, 2.38, but hey ho. So drill yourself a hole in your plastic like that, hold your axle in, slide that over the top, make sure it fits, then slide it over your axle here so that it's a good fit. Now obviously, because it's only the bulge on the end of this stub that I'm working with, I want to get it on that so it stays. So there we are, that's there. And then mark with a pen exactly the axle. Right, I think you can see that there. That stub is just about exactly where that axle is. Okay, so take that off and then drill as you can see. I've just started that and you can see that that hole has intersected my black line perfectly, so that should be exactly in the right place. Center it again. So drill the hole. And then double check it axle to axle. And as you can see, that is just about perfect. So then take your gauge, as it now is, slide it over the axle there, and then you can transfer that mark into your chassis. I can just feel that there, and there you go. So that has put that, and if that little pip that you've started with your drill isn't quite on the line, adjust it. Well, you can adjust it with the guide off, up or down, whichever way. It's pretty easy to do once you're at this stage. And once you've got that little mark, you can then simply drill it through, and that should, in theory, be exactly where you want your wheel centered. forget the chassis, we're jumping around in the video, just looking at the back axle. You'll notice that I changed the axle. The 2.2 Carrera axle was just too sloppy, and they'd used a 2.2mm axle because they've used standard bearings and they had to get the knurling that the wheels were held on with through the bearings. So rather than making oversized bearings with a standard axle that's knurled, they used a smaller axle, knurled it, so it ended up being the size of a standard axle, which went through standard bearings. But we don't want any of the knurling, so I was able to just replace the entire axle with a standard axle, which is a nice push fit onto the wheels. It's also a nice push fit through the gear. So that's why I've changed the axle, and now we've got a much better, a much tighter back axle, and it's still nice and free. So there we are. So if you want to tighten up the back end using the standard bearings, just replace the axle for a standard 2.38mm slot car axle and you'll be good to go. So that's the back end. So the sides fit in the sides and the ends more or less mimic the body itself. But this is where it all gets a little bit personal to the car itself. So obviously this profile matches the body, but it doesn't match the body from the side perspective. So what will have to happen is that this skirt will have to be removed, cut away and glued up inside these frames to match the actual body of the car. And the same with the back. There's quite a bit of difference here. So what will happen here is I will cut away this particular portion and the bulkheads, and then take this piece off and angle it up so that it goes up into the body, because the body scoops up at the back. And the same with the skirts. What I'll probably do is just cut this last sort of 5mm down each side, put a bit of a chamfer on it and tilt it up on both sides so that it runs along and then comes up into the sill. So just to customize it to the actual car itself. But other than that, you can see that it's basically there, but just not quite snugging up into the body. So that's the next job, is to personalize this chassis to scoop it all up so that it all falls inside the body shape that we're dealing with. Okay, and just to confirm my thoughts about the body scooping up, here is the actual chassis to the plastic car, and you can see the back is scooping up quite a bit, and the front is also scooping up as well. So that just confirms what I thought. So that it fits up inside the body shell. Now, one thing I am noticing while I'm doing this is I'm making my life incredibly difficult, because the axles are high up in the chassis. If I'd have used 0.5mm off-centered bearings and turned them all the way down, that would have lowered the axle and lifted the chassis up into the body. But because I haven't done that, I've had to put on these tucks all around the edge, which requires a decent amount more work. However, this is the first one, so we're learning as we go. So the next time I do another chassis, I'm going to put in 0.5mm off-centered bearings at the back, and I'm going to drill the hole for the front axle lower to lift the chassis and make my life a little bit easier. So the next task is to get the guide into the front of the car. So what I shall do is just take my block and I shall drill the hole through and get the guide all set up in the block, and then I shall get the block into the chassis between those frames, slipped underneath the axle. Now I've made my life difficult again because I've fixed the front wheels into place and there's nothing much I can do with getting those away. So I'm going to have to chop around this one and thread it underneath the axle, but we'll get it done. So that's all got to start by getting it on the setup plate so we can work out exactly where and how high that guide needs to be. So place. A little bit more work than really necessary because I'd already fixed in my front axle, but there we are, that's the way it is. So guide goes in, and does it pass my bristle test? If you recall from a previous video, I did a little test to see if the guide would work under the strength of some bristles of a paintbrush, and we'll see. Yes, it does. No problem at all. Nice and free. And also it's not particularly wonky either. There's hardly any movement in there worth talking about. So that's that. So now what I need to do is get some braids in there, get some spacers, and get it all set up so the ride height is correct when it's placed on our setup plate. So that's the next job, setting it up, getting some place. Still nice and easy to move and set to the correct height. And that's a 2mm piece of plastic card, just fettled down to suit, and it is exactly at the correct height. And as you move the car along, the front wheels move. You can actually see that, to be fair. There, you can just about see it there. The wheels move while still being free to turn on top. So that's the guide all in place. So now it's dangerously close to becoming a slot car. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to wire this motor in, and then I'm going to fix the motor mount, and then think about getting the body fitted onto the chassis, and then we'll move on to fitting the interior to the body. One guide fitted, all set up and working. No problems. Right, let's get this body mounted. Okay, so that's the body on. Now, it was my intention to film making these body mounts. However, I set the camera to the wrong speed, so I ended up recording 38 minutes of standard speed, and that would have taken up too much memory. So I've had to delete that lot, but I'll show you instead. And it's all relevant to this body anyway, so it doesn't actually make any usable difference to you, the viewer. So what I ended up doing was making this little plastic tongue glued to the chassis between the frames, and then cut a slit in it, and then put this piece of plastic card into it to come through to simulate the number plate. It's an old trick for die-cast cars. And then the front, I ended up putting a load of sellotape over this front end and then scratching up the metal and putting a great big glob of car body filler and hooking the back end in and lowering the front end down into it, and that then gave me a really nice position for the front end. And then once it's dry, took it back out and then carved away and made it neater, and then I reinforced the sides with a bit of plasticard so that my screw holes didn't break out the side of the car body filler, and that's done a really good job of holding the body in good and solid, and it's really nicely located as well. So now, as you can see, we've got a really nice position on those wheels and it's all good and solid. I know you're supposed to have body float, but I'm not entirely sure that in die-cast body float is a thing. These bodies are so heavy, I don't think you really want them flailing around. I don't know if that's going to help you from the performance point of view. So now it's got to start trying to get all my interior back in, starting with my glass and then all the rest of the interior. So hopefully I might catch that on fast forward. Well, I must say that was incredibly painless. I was expecting it to put up a lot more of a fight than that. All I ended up doing was just chopping at the center console, taking off the door cards just for weight's sake, chopping out the middle of the seats, and it's all gone in. No problems at all. I was expecting it to put up much more of a fight. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hot glue it eventually on the insides here, here and here on these 4 points, but I'm not going to fit it in permanently for now because I've got a driver figure coming which I want to fit in the seat and chop him around to fit in there. So all I've got left to do now is paint up these bits of car body filler, just paint around the wheel arches where I've just chamfered the inner edges just so they don't cause a problem, and we're done. That's it, it's finished. So let's go on with a little bit of painting and we can hit the track. And there we are. It works. No problems at all. Goes around the track extremely nicely. It's going to depend very much on what car you have. Depends on the weight and the centre of gravity and a whole host of different things, tyres, and because these are very much scratch build projects when you're doing something like this. But, you know, all the ingredients are there for you to play with and see what you can get out of it. So, how well did it go around Crow Valley? Well, as I've said many times, 55 seconds is a decent time. 50 seconds is quick. Anything beyond 50 seconds is absolutely flying. So you got to adjust your expectations a little bit when you're running 1/43 scale. Because of the size, the footprint and everything else is a lot smaller than 30-second. And also, swinging a heavy die-cast body around is asking a lot, and they do require being driven in quite a different way to plastic bodied cars. Anyhow, how did it do? It did this. There you go. I think that's pretty good, all things considered. I do have another die-cast proxy car in the side wings here waiting, which I have played with, and I must say that my first attempt is very comparable. I'm quite hopeful that it's going to do all right. So there you go. So if you fancy making yourself one of these cars, like I said at the beginning of the video, I am offering these chassis and these tyres for sale in my web shop, link below. So if you fancy having a go at it, then by all means buy those parts and have a little go. But as I said before, you won't get this chassis into a die-cast car in half an hour. It's a little bit of a couple of day project, you know, a couple of evenings, and fettle around and think about it and choose your parts carefully and get it in. And by all means, you don't need to use the parts that I've used. I just used that Carrera axle because it happens to be convenient. But as I found out, the axle is a little bit small and a bit sloppy, so I ended up changing that. But there's no reason why you can't change many other things. I know for a fact that the bearings from Scalextric will fit into these holders. They seem to be standard, the bearings, so I should imagine that most bearings would fit in there. And you can probably use slotted gears in there. You might need to trim a few things and this and that. But, you know, it's a blank canvas. You can do what you want with it. So anyway, I've had a lot of fun turning a toy die-cast car into a very usable slot car. And with the upcoming proxy race coming soon, it's going to be really interesting to see just how well it does compare to other cars that have been made by more competent 43rd scale racers than I am. But anyway, if you enjoyed this content, maybe you'll subscribe. And if you hit the little bell, that'll be awesome. So until the next time, have fun.